Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So this should be part 4 of me talking about the psyops that were going on and some events that almost certainly were psyops. Part of psyop activity, psychological operation activity. I put the pictures on the screen that show you that psychological operations are real, and part of it is to create discontent at times, and sometimes they try to reinforce certain sentiments and moods and behaviors and beliefs in organizations and the pre-existing social order. Okay. So there was a time when I was locked in a chest when I was younger by one of the babysitters who was from an Israeli family whose father was in the Mossad. Okay. And what had happened was, they were playing some kind of game or something. They did the same thing to my brothers, what have you. And so that factors in. Okay, so, these individual events, a lot of times it's older people doing it to me. And some of these guys are rock and roll like. Some of these guys are from whatever Jewish culture that person was from. Okay. Etc. And of course, this person's name was also something that was significant during the time. Later on, his father would commit suicide, right? He'd attempt suicide in one of the houses we lived in when I was younger, and which is the one I live in now. And he would eventually go through with it, as the story goes. I think that first he slit his wrist and it was in a bathtub, and the second time he did the thing with the car where there's, you cover up the muffler or whatever the hell, and it fills up with smoke or whatever that is about. Okay. Rather unfortunate. Okay. So, and of course I'm not mad at this person or whatever, but whether I should be or not. This is just telling the story. There was another time, where I live at now, there used to be a guy who lived down the street. I guess his name was Jason or something like that. And he, put me in a freezer when he was mad at me, and he sat on it. I was probably about maybe 11 years old or so. And he probably was like, I don't know, 20 years old, 18 years old. See, it was up there somewhere, okay? And he gets in trouble for it and so on and so forth. But you see all these incidents, like, there's so many of them. And it's clearly, people with some kind of inferiority complex who are behind it. So what comes to mind, I'm not saying the Masons are behind it, but they're a group that comes to mind, right? A group that tries to look good, okay, that hires poor people and tries to scapegoat them. Like we see with proxy wars, right? There's proxy wars in America in terms of social wars, in terms of poor white people who they label quote-unquote white trash. Because to them, white culture, and this is how I describe it too in terms of what white culture is that mainstream culture where people are accepted, right? It's the suburban person, it's the rich person, it's the teacher, it's the police officer, it's the school bus driver, it's the preacher, right? These kind of white people that are accepted. And then there's white people that they hire to do psyops who, the CIA kind of brings drugs in as the story goes. Okay, and they distribute. They have middlemen and people in their family and things like this that they distribute their drugs through, right? And some of them distribute it more to the rock and roll community, some more to the gang community. There's some overlap, what have you. And these groups also run psychological operations on people. And as soon as you hear this, you must know that I'm right. Okay, what do drugs do, right? They change the moods and sentiments and behaviors of groups. And we see with the CIA experiments, where with the truth serums, they're experimenting with different drugs and materials and substances for the purpose of controlling someone's mental state and mind control, right? And behavioral control. And it's done to individuals, it's done to groups. And if you look into the research of that, the Project Artichoke, right? MK Ultra, it lines up, right? MK Ultra is called RAM. So anyway, there was that incident. There's also an incident I forgot to mention about that kid who we're wrestling in the bathroom at Cardin, standing up, and he's losing, and he kind of punches me, and I think he gives me a 3-hit combo, right? 2 in the stomach and then a kick to the stomach. And I wrestle him, and I'm like, quit being a punk and let's, wrestle me, right? And he said, I don't want to go there with you, because he knew that I would win, right? He said something like, you're right, and I don't want to go there with you. He said something like that, and it really stayed with me. Unless this is something they managed to put in my head later, that part stayed with me. Some of these things clearly occurred, and some of these things, the memory's kind of fuzzy. But I'm almost positive he said that to me. Okay, and that kind of was strange, because later on, we see various people say that exact phrase to me, right? I don't want to go there with you, which is not something that, anyone says. These are kind of catchphrases, right? Psychological, they sensitize you to the phrase, and then they use it again. They kind of trigger you. So if we look at the, you know, unbelievable amount of abuse that was leveled toward me, right? Without being in a family where my dad kind of hits me with a closed fist or something. He doesn't, right? He didn't. There's one time when he slapped me, you know, when I was laying in the dirt trying to avoid him detecting me because I didn't want him to give me a hard time because he comes home in a bad mood. And he said, "What are you doing laying in the dirt?" He drove by. He was very pissed off and he slapped me and his pinky nail kind of cut my throat a little bit, right? You know, but that's, you know, again, I consider that nothing, right? Things happen, right? But, you know, these are the facts that matter. My dad's a very morally upright person. The white man kind of rubbed off him the kind of sense of importance that he deserves to have, and society kind of neglected giving him that importance, and especially in the form of, you know, them financially sabotaging him. And so it created somewhat of a complex, which also created the domino effect and contributed to the domino effect of the various things that had occurred. And keep in mind, I'm the most disciplined and logical and righteous person that ever lived. So this stuff didn't make me some kind of monster. It's just part of the story.